first video, I talked about hard and soft enamels and the different ways we use to manufacture a pin. In this video, we're going to dig into the settings for Photoshop and Illustrator. Now, right off the top, I'm going to tell you we all prefer Adobe Illustrator. It's a vector-based program. It creates crisp and clean lines. If you're a Photoshop designer, don't worry, you can still submit Photoshop, but there's something you need to know. No matter what, someone somewhere is going to redraw your art so that it is vector-based. And the reason is the manufacturing equipment requires a vector file. So just be aware of that.
Setting up Photoshop. If you design exclusively in Photoshop, there are a few things you need to know. Let's start with color matching. As artists and creative people, color matching is very important. If you do not have a Pantone color chip chart, please buy one. You can grab them on Amazon or go to a print shop and ask to borrow theirs when deciding your enamel colors. You really need to look at an actual Pantone book to ensure color accuracy. The reason is that every computer monitor displays color differently. Our factory uses the same Pantone book when mixing the enamel color. If you do not specify exact Pantone colors for us, we pick the colors for you. The proper way to define colors in Photoshop is to find the color you want in the Pantone book first and then add it to your design palette second. To access Pantone colors in Photoshop, load up your palette and click on the color libraries and pick Pantone coded. Canvas size. If you design on a canvas size larger than actual, be sure to scale it down before sending it to us. Create a second document and then paste your art into the smaller canvas to see how it holds up when reduced. Then print it out. Make sure it's legible at scale. Canvas color system and resolution. Set your Photoshop document up at 300 dpi, CYMK at actual pin size. RGB is acceptable if that's your preference. Just remember, the book is gospel, that's what we'll use to match your color. Did you know? I've seen some artists spend a lot of time trying to get the pin art to look like a real pin in Photoshop by adding metal finishes and highlights and gradients and shadows. This might create a benefit if you're trying to pre-sell your pins before they arrive, but for our purposes, we strip away all that detail. File submission. Please send us your PSD files with layers intact. Rasterize the type to remove the fonts. Do not flatten your design, please. Illustrator setup. Adobe Illustrator is our recommended design software. Illustrator is a vector-based program that works with our factory's mold-making machines. It's also very popular with printers and sign makers. Vector graphics produce scalable graphics that are crisp and clean. Keep in mind, you cannot convert a Photoshop file to a vector file. It has to start in Illustrator. Setting up Illustrator. Step 1. Load up the Pantone coded color book when you start. Remember, pick the color in your Pantone book and then assign it in Illustrator. Step 2. Line thickness. The minimum line thickness to use in Illustrator is 0.3. Going below that makes it hard to engrave the design in mold steel. Be sure to go to your preferences and ensure that your scale line widths is selected. When adding color to your pin, ensure that there's 2 millimeters of space for the color to flow into, and design closed shapes. Remember, epoxy is liquid. Download our handy template and you'll get some useful design tools to make sure that your minimums are okay. Step 4. The gradients palette is nice for artistic purposes, but we prefer if you design in flat colors. Just spec the metal in a solid color like yellow or light gray. Don't try to make the metal look realistic. Step 5. If your art has a lot of details, please separate the art into layers or groups.
Well, that wraps up the second video in the Masterclass Designer series. It was a bit technical, so I do hope you stick around for the third video, which is designing for pins. In that video, I'm going to dig into some specific tips that are going to make sure that your enamel pins look better than anyone else's.